Dave Ash, and I'm the parliamentary candidate for the National Health Action Party in Sutton and Cheam, the 7th of May general election. The National Health Action Party was set up in the wake of the coalition government's NHS reforms, specifically the Health and Social Care Act 2012, an act with which Mr Burstow should be very familiar, as it was he who guided this Tory bill's passage through Parliament. This act represented the biggest top-down reorganisation of the NHS since it was founded in 1948. None of the electorate in 2010 knew that the people they elected would be pushing through these earth-shattering reforms. No party prior to the general election in 2010 had even mentioned it in their manifesto, and it didn't feature in the coalition agreement. This wicked act, in its very first clause, removed the responsibility from the Health Secretary to provide you with a national health service. Were the politicians who pushed this through acting in your best interest when they did so? It also opened up the NHS to privatisation like never before, forcing the NHS to put contracts out to tender to any qualified provider, and in many cases, those very companies decide to offshore their profits to minimise their tax bill. Again, were they acting in your best interest when they did so? It's also massively increased the amount of private work which NHS Foundation Trusts can carry out in NHS property which you and I have paid for over the years, and in the case of PFI property, will be paying for forever. Your best interests? And now the spectre of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership looms large. This trade agreement has the capacity to make the privatisation of our public services, including the NHS, irreversible. All of the main parties are apparently in favour of TTIP, although Labour have made some noises suggesting they would somehow exempt the NHS, which is something which lots of research suggests is not possible. I believe that every party of government over the last 30 years or so have played their part in the destruction of our public services, including the NHS. The Tories started the fire by privatising things like British Gas and hospital cleaning services, and with the introduction of the Private Finance Initiative. Then Labour stoked the fire with an explosion of PFIs and opened up a bit more of the NHS to private companies, and now the Tory and Lib Dem coalition have poured petrol on the fire. The recurring theme here is the wholesale moving of public money into private pockets. Well, I say this must be stopped and reversed now. Public services, including the NHS, are not the property of whichever shade of government is in power at any given time. They are not theirs to sell because they belong to all of us. I think it's long overdue that we have a few politicians in Parliament who are going to actually do what they're elected to do. Represent the people who elect them and fight to retain and improve what is ours. Thank you. This was a funny thing actually. I found myself spending a lot of time shouting at the television and very angry when I was hearing news about the way that our NHS was being ripped up. And I could see that my kids were going to have to grow up without the benefits of an NHS. And me and my missus were talking. I said, someone ought to do something about this. And I realised, actually, maybe it was time for me to stand up and do something about it. So that's what inspired me to stand, because I couldn't stand by and watch it happen without doing anything. So, thank you. Thank you. I personally think that the NHS is the finest achievement of any nation ever. And that's why the corporate vultures are circling and they're trying to take it away from us. Yes, it's very expensive, but we deserve it. It's also the most efficient healthcare service in the developed world. That is a very good reason to stand up for it. I'm not here to knock the NHS by any stretch. I want to make that absolutely clear. Education and health are fiscal multipliers. That is to say, for health, for example, every pound we spend on healthcare yields an approximate £4 return to GDP. That's a no-brainer for me. You spend a bit of money on it, people are more productive when they're healthy. Tax avoidance and evasion is estimated to be over £100 billion every year. So I don't think for a moment that you would ever recover all of that, but if you could get a significant chunk of that back by going after people who are avoiding taxes, that would certainly help. And another thing that I would mention is that we've got an awful lot of PFI deals which are costing us a small fortune, and in many cases those PFI deals are with banks that we as taxpayers now own. So I say we need to go and renegotiate those contracts for something that's approaching a realistic interest rate. Thank you. I've noticed that since 2010, poor people have got poorer and rich people have got a lot richer. Every major party represented on this panel insists on continuing austerity. Well, I say it has to stop. That's all I have to say. It's a very good question, actually, and I'm grateful for it. The NHA will not have a party whip, so providing our policies are adhered to by all of the candidates, they're content for us to take free rein on anything that's not. As Maeve said, I joined the NHA because I believe that they have the right policies for all of us, in particular in regard to the NHS, but on a wider level as well. We don't have any big corporate sponsors, so none of us will be marching to the tune of those corporate sponsors. I'm only really in this because I believe it's the right thing to do. I'm not a career politician. I've never in the past wanted to be a politician, but I thought someone ought to stand up and defend our NHS. Thank you. I absolutely agree with everything you've just said. Mr. Burstow in 2010 in his literature said that people should vote for him to keep the Tories out. And since 2010, he's carried out every dastardly deed they've asked for. And he's saying it again. On tuition fees, they were introduced by Labour, and despite their pledge prior to the election, they were tripled by the coalition. I think that's unforgivable, actually. Education should be free. On the Syria vote, Mr. Burstow actually voted yes and no, which is an interesting way of abstaining from a vote. And with the Clause 119 amendment that Mr. Burstow submitted, I was at the meeting with Mr. Burstow with 38 Degrees. He submitted an amendment, withdrew it, and then voted against his own amendment. So, yeah, I don't think that inspires a great deal of confidence, and that is a lot of the reason why I'm standing here tonight. Thank you. Thank you.